On to today's topic, restaurant composting. We're going to learn how to prepare for the new DSNY composting laws with our esteemed guest, Christina Grace. She's the CEO of Foodprint Group. Foodprint has worked closely with Google, Eataly, Dig In, Restaurant Associates, and related to help everyone reach environmental, economic, and social goals through different sustainable waste management projects. Christina Grace is a leader in sustainable food systems and planning. She's the co-author of the NYC Zero Waste Design Guidelines and is a certified zero waste advisor. Without further ado, Christina, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Give me one moment to share my screen. Here we go.
Excellent. We see it, Christina. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much to Gilly, Noam, Matt, and the whole MarketMan team for having me. It's terrific to be part of this important webinar series. As Matt mentioned, I'm Christina Grace. I'm the CEO of Foodprint. We work with restaurants, food service, and hotel groups to reduce waste and improve recycling. We're here not just to keep wasted materials out of landfill, but to also help our clients get the most out of all the resources they purchase. We care deeply about the planet and the health of people, and we love food and food places. I'm a trained cook, and I recognize the tight margins and the operational realities from fast casual to fine dining. The good news is that the best practices in sustainable waste management that we're going to talk about today also save money. Let's have a little context here, and this is a little bit about why we do what we do. You know, in the large cities around the world, there is one restaurant cafe, at least in the developed world, one restaurant cafe for every 30 people. 85% of the materials in a typical restaurant are recyclable. And what's changed dramatically over the last few decades is that back in the 1950s, Americans spent 3 times as much on groceries, going to grocery stores, as on food away from home in restaurants. But in 2014, for the first time here in America, restaurant spending surpassed grocery spending. So that's a lot of food places and a lot of waste. 80% or more waste materials are generated in back of house in restaurants. This is very, very controllable material. It's material that we can make sure is properly separated. Yet sustainable waste management is rarely designed into kitchens and places, and we see the impacts in our places every day, particularly here in New York City, where all of our waste, or so much of our waste, goes out onto the curb. We're all tripping over it. So we see waste as a design flaw. We attribute 80% of the problem of waste to design, and that's the design of the products we purchase. For example, some products are just impossible in our current infrastructure to recycle, and that's soft plastics, plastic wrap, latex gloves, and mixed materials, containers. You might have a bottle that has both metal and plastic on it, and that is trash. But the design of our spaces are also a huge challenge. If we haven't thought about where and how we're going to handle our recyclable materials. For example, if we're ready to launch a composting program and we have trash Slim Jims all over our kitchen, and then in the corner we have one compost bin, then it's going to be more difficult for people to compost. So it's super simple things, but we really work with our clients to understand how the design of their spaces is going to make their programs work. And if that site design and that purchasing is going great, then the behavior change, the actual training piece is so much easier. So we're about purchasing, design, and education. We are so lucky to work with fantastic companies, many of whom are very eager to try new things. For example, DIG's Reusable To-Go Container Program. We have another small restaurant client that's working to be the first True Zero Waste certified restaurant in the country. True Zero Waste certification is a sister standard to LEED building certification, and has really been designed for very large operations, particularly manufacturing, and our innovative client really wants to show that it can work in a restaurant space. So now here's the big picture. In the past 50 years, humans have consumed more resources than in all previous history. 40% of the food grown in the US is wasted from farm to plate. That's 63 million tons worth 165 billion. And most of that waste happens in our customer-facing places, restaurants and retail, and in the places we live. At the same time, 1 out of 6 Americans is food insecure, and that's 1 out of 5 children. That's 40 million people who may not know where their next meal will come from. And we know that if we could capture some of that edible food from farm to plate, that we could feed a lot of people. By just reducing food losses by 15% would be enough to feed more than 20 million Americans every year. But what's happening to most of that food? It's going to landfill. And when it goes to landfill, it creates methane, which is 34 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. And most of, well, 14% of the methane generated in the US that's impacting climate change is coming from landfills, and we know most of that is food. So what do? We look to do things differently. We reduce waste first in our places. And not only does this have, reduction has the greatest impact on our bottom line. We reduce food waste, we not only save food costs, we save labor costs, we save hauling costs, but we also have the greatest environmental impact because that's food that wasn't grown for us to throw away. So we're saving water, we're saving fertilizer, we're saving all the fuel that it takes to truck that food from farm to plate if we're just reducing upfront. Then we feed people because the next best highest use for food is to eat it, and we want people to have that first opportunity. But we have clients that where it's not servable to people, a lot of their prep waste can be used for animal feed. We have a lot of food waste in our region going to poultry and pig feed. And then we compost, which is what we're going to talk a lot about today. Or in the case of New York City, which we'll learn more about, we convert a lot of our food waste to renewable energy through anaerobic digestion in our wastewater treatment facility at Newtown Creek in Brooklyn. And the absolute last resort is disposal. Here in New York, a lot of things go to incineration, which is better than landfill, but not great. But a lot also goes to landfill. And some of that landfill is as far as North Carolina. So these things are not being landfilled close to home, and so that adds to the overall environmental impact. So we want to see change. So we're going to talk a lot about composting, but just very quickly, what is it? This slide gives you an example of both urban composting. On the left, you see Red Hook Farms, where community members are making compost from food waste to use on an urban farm site in Brooklyn. And then on the right, you see McEnroe Farm, which is a composting facility where some of our clients' material goes to be converted into compost and then used to grow food at McEnroe Farm, but also sold to home gardeners. Now, the compost process is pretty straightforward. Using temperature, we speed up the natural decay of food waste and yard waste. And in oxygen-rich conditions, that turns into compost, or we also call humus. And the end product is concentrated, full of nutrients, full of healthy microorganisms that are great for growing very nutritious food, also great for retaining moisture in our soil. So even in places where we're not growing food, so where we're building construction, we want compost in soil because when we're dealing with flooding, part of that is that our soil doesn't do a good job retaining water. So there's a lot of benefits to making compost. Ideally, some of the compost that's made from your food scraps will grow food upstate New York or Pennsylvania or nearby that will find its way back to your menu, which is really cool. This slide it looks more complicated than it really is. All I want you to really take a look at here is that orange bar in the middle. That orange bar is organic waste across New York City's waste stream. Here we show paper, metal, organics, trash. The orange bar is 30% of our waste stream. And this is a view of our residential waste, but our commercial waste is very well aligned. So we produce about 8,200 tons per year overall of organic material, which is why the city is really pushing forward legislation to do better at separating our food waste and getting it out of the trash stream, because the city has a 0 by 30 goal for waste. And if we want to get to 0 by 30, what we're going to have to do is not just do a better job of separating our material and keeping it out of landfill, but we're going to have to reduce it by half, which is no small task. So reduction is still at the top of the list. But when you see where we're going, it helps to understand why the city is really pushing so hard to get businesses to separate their food waste. So today, our current legislation requires that restaurant chains of 100 or more sites, restaurants with 15,000 square feet or more, and retail sites of 25,000 square feet or more separate their food waste for beneficial use. And also hotels with 150 more sites. And when we talk about what we need to separate, we're really focused on food scraps, food soil paper, like paper, tea bags, coffee filters, napkins, and then certified compostable products. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the city is looking to expand this because we are not making great progress on our path to 0 by 30. So the new regulations are looking at much smaller businesses. So instead of restaurant chains of 100, we're looking at restaurant chains of 2 or more sites. It's a big change. And those changes are coming soon, where the city has already gone through a process where a comment period on the legislation has happened. And now it's just a matter of when it's going to pass. And once it does, which the goal is in the first quarter of this year, there'll be a 6-month grace period for businesses that are included. And then there will be another 6 months where the city will start showing up and they won't be fining people, but they'll be writing, educational tickets. And then it'll be after the end of that 12 months when the fines will begin, and those fines can be up to $1,000 per violation if it's the third violation. So it's something to just to be thinking about. But I think the most important thing is that it's coming. The restaurant sizes, I believe 8,000 square feet, and retail stores of 15,000, they're just going to get a lot smaller in terms of what the organics regs will cover. So there's just a lot. Oh, here we go. There's a lot of new businesses. Oh, here, I'm sorry. It's 10,000 square feet for retail food stores. Now, you will be getting these slides after the webinar, so you don't have to memorize this, and we're here to help if you have questions. So what do we do? Actually, what happens to the organics that you separate? It either goes to compost, or as I mentioned before, it goes to anaerobic digestion. A big piece of the legislation is that the city was only able to expand it if we had enough facilities in the region to handle the food waste. And we do. But what you're seeing here is, again, a picture of Backyard Farms, but on the right, it's Newtown Creek. It's our wastewater treatment facility, which at its capacity will be able to take in 500 tons of organic material from the commercial hauling sector per day. Right now, it's at about 250. And we have many more of these treatment facilities in the city that can handle organics. And we're also seeing an expansion in our compost sites. But right now, there are 14 facilities within 100 miles of the city. And when we keep in mind that some of our material is going to landfill thousands of miles away, being able to compost right here in the city or nearby within the metro region is really, really important. One of the challenges we face, though, is that compostable dishware is not highly valued or even allowed in some of our processing facilities. It's not consistently processed in compost sites because PLA is a challenging material. It's slow to break down, and it doesn't add nutrients to the soil. So when we're talking about compostables that compost sites will take, we're looking at paper, bamboo, paper-based materials. Now, what happens when your organic waste goes to Newtown Creek, for example, is that all of the material goes through pretreatment, and all of the solids, because there's a lot of plastic and other contamination in our organics, gets pulled out ahead of time. And that goes to landfill, and only the food actually goes into the anaerobic digester in today's world. So if you have compostables in that mix with all the other contamination, that is getting pulled out too. So currently they are not being processed. We do tell our clients though that because compostables do not have toxic materials in them, if you have guaranteed that you don't have fluorinated chemicals in your compostables, that is, and that's something you'll learn more about in the next webinar in the series, then they're still better than putting plastics in the soil. We know plastic recyclable items can only be recycled a handful of times before they become trash. But what you're seeing here in this slide on the left is a machine. This Thor is a turbo separator, and that's what's pulling all of the plastic and the materials and the compostables out of the food waste before it goes into an anaerobic digester. So what do we do if we're struggling with compostables? Well, we try, you know, back to that EPA chart, we go for reusable, we go for reducing the amount of waste we create. So we work with our clients to implement reusable dishware programs for their dine-in customers as a starting point, which means making sure they have dishwashing capacity. We know that these programs pay for themselves, particularly if the client's using compostables already, because compostable dishware is expensive. But we also work with our clients, and here on the right you see this is Dig-In's reusable to-go bowl, and they have a member to-go bowl program called Canteen, so that they're also not sending disposables out into the world for people to have to deal with in their offices and homes. And Canteen is just being piloted in 2 Dig sites currently, but the intent is to expand it broadly. And also to be looking to bringing in other partners. They intentionally did not brand the bowl because these to-go bowl programs will only work if they work at multiple restaurant sites. Not everybody wants to eat at the same place every day. But so those are some ideas, and it gives you some background on why this is so important and what the context here in New York City. But so what are you going to do in your own operation? To get started, you're going to try to understand how much food waste and compostable materials you already have. One way to do that is an audit. And it's our recommended starting point for all of our clients. And it's so important because it's where you really learn about what's happening. If we walk into a client site and say, we can get you to 0 waste, and that's 90% or better diversion of your materials from landfill, they look at us like we have 6 heads because they're so convinced they have so much trash. But then we go in and we separate all of the materials and come to find 54% is food waste, and 12% is trash, and 17% is recycling, and so on. And when you see this, then you start to realize, wow, if I can just put all that material in the proper bin and separate out that food waste and make sure I'm doing a better job with my recycling, then I'm going to get to 0. And what's key about recycling is, despite what we're hearing about in China, recycling is still a cost savings over hauling trash. Compost costs about the same right now as hauling trash. In the future in New York City, it will get cheaper, but today it's about the same. So if we want to also be saving money in our hauling program, we really need to beef up our recycling. Most companies are pulling out that cardboard, but we have to do a better job with all of our glass, metal, plastics. And look at packaging. Some soft plastics like pallet wrap and other things are recyclable if they're separated out. Really kind of dive into that, because that will help you pay for other parts of the program as you're thinking about really expanding your good work. And so when we look at food waste, not only are we trying to understand how much, but we want to know where it's coming from, because the goal is reduce, reduce, reduce. And most food waste is prep, as you can see over on the left. Some of that prep could be used as animal feed or reused. We've had clients take juice fiber and make veggie burgers. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting things that can happen. Some of our clients that are juicing so much their citrus, we have one example where citrus has gone to a brewer and for beer making and other things. But so there are things you can do there. But what we're really looking at is that prepared unserved food. That's the area that's the most expensive food item. You've cooked it, it didn't get eaten. Sometimes that's on your hot or cold line. And can that be donated or can that be reused? And then we tend to see a lot of waste too in catering events, because we also always have to plan for overage. So we look at ways to manage that food so that that it does remain food safe and can be potentially consumed through a donations program. So we reduce food waste, as I mentioned. That means we've got to track it, and we really need to track it every day. I mean, we would love for our clients to do an audit, but we really want to see them taking advantage of the tools they have, like MarketMan, where you actually have a functionality to track your food waste every day and really tie that back to menu, tie that back to inventory. And that's where you can really drive change. And we know that when we reduce, the impact is so high. Food waste reduction can have 800 times the economic value and 7 times the greenhouse gas savings per ton of composting. And composting is better than anaerobic digestion. So what it's telling you is reduce, reduce. And we have lots of donations partners here in New York City. This is just a smattering here: New York Rescue Mission, Common Pantry, there's Bowery Rescue Mission, City Harvest. Rescuing leftover cuisine is great for smaller sites. City Harvest tends to have some higher thresholds in terms of what they'll pick up. And then Rethink is a really interesting group that's coming in and really looking at your kitchen and seeing what they can remake with your prep waste and leftovers for food donations. And you need to make sure your hauler has an organics program, or you need to find a hauler that does. Most New York City haulers do. And here in New York City, where they don't, they often outsource to others. We want you to ask, is it their own program or outsourced? Because there's a markup if it's outsourced and you're trying to be cost effective here. We often work with Royal and Avid because they work with compost sites, and a lot of our clients are particularly, they don't want it to, their food waste to go to anaerobic digestion. They're really thinking circular. They want it to go to a compost site where it will go back into growing food. But if that doesn't matter, there are a lot of haulers that are taking their organic waste to Newtown Creek right now, Action, Waste Connections. And there are also micro haulers here in New York City, Reclaimed Organics, BK Rot, where they're actually biking compost around to either processing sites of the city. That could be a compost site in a community garden, or there's Bokashi that is composting on a golf course in outer Brooklyn. But they will turn that back into usable materials, but they have low thresholds in terms of, these are for sites that don't have a lot of food waste. Whereas if you have, you know, most of our clients, even very small food sites, are going to have more, you know, up to 300 more pounds a day. So then you're looking at a commercial hauler. So as I mentioned up front, we see waste as a design flaw. So we work with our clients to look at design throughout their operation. So in front of the house, we're looking at how we can employ reusable dishware for water glasses, for do we have bus stations? So if people are using reusable dishware, it's easy. And what we see too is those sites that are employing reusable dishware and that really are thinking about these things do not generate front of house trash. People might bring in their Starbucks cup or something, but they're not generating any trash in house. So often there's a sign up that says, please do not dispose of your trash here. We have there's an organic stream and there's a recycling stream, because we don't create trash in our space. And that just simplifies things, because often we're also going into spaces that have a 2-stream recycling and trash today, and we're trying to get them to compost, and it's very expensive to create a whole new recycling station, and we're able to work with the existing infrastructure. So in that back of house, which is where the big wins really are, it's so straightforward. We're looking at, do you have proper signage? Do you have enough organics bins? In a lot of cases, we go in and we use green Sani buckets that are like 3-gallon buckets, and we just nest them in the black Slim Jims that are already back of house. You can see the picture of Brett's Bakery in the middle down below. And that means that every time someone goes to throw something in the trash, they're reminded, oh, I gotta look, and this is food, and oh, it should go in the green bucket. And then that gets tipped into a bigger tote. We'll talk a little bit about totes later. But again, when we're talking about reusable dishware, we need to make sure that we have proper dishwashing. We have a staging area for front of the house dishes. One of the biggest challenges with getting to zero waste is that a lot of liquids end up in the trash, definitely front of house because people dump their whole coffee cup still half full. But in back of house too, where you have very wet food. So in front of house, we look at liquid disposal. In back of house, we just make sure that every sink has a strainer, and there's all kinds of different kinds of strainers for back of house kitchens, but that we're not putting that water in your waste, because that water is 8 pounds a gallon. It's heavy, and over time that's going to cost you money, and it's messy. So again, for design, we look at visual cues, color coding, compost green, metal, glass, plastic, blue, trash is black or red, and we just really try to make sure those visual cues are on everything, whether it's signs, labels, the color of the bins, and that's in your storage area as well as in your kitchen. I'm just trying to make these things easy. So here's just example signage on the left. This is Dig-In's back of house signage. In the middle, this is actually front of house signage in a corporate dining area. There's just more stuff than a typical fast casual restaurant in corporate dining. But then you look at Recycle Across America signage, which is on the right at the top, and that's super simple, and that's very typical of front of house signage. That's actually Whole Foods uses that in a lot of their sites. And I talked a little bit about bin setup. So you set up your you make sure you have what we call equal opportunity disposal, so that you have bins where they're needed and of every type. So it's as easy for me to compost, recycle, and throw away trash. And then you make sure that you map it. We do bin mapping all the time. It's super simple, but just to make sure that everything gets set up in its proper place every morning. Because if you come in and there's only trash bins around and it gets busy, then composting isn't going to happen. So it's important to start your day right. This is a little SOP, which we put together so people understand, okay, the compost starts in this bucket, it gets tipped into this bigger tote. This is a 64-gallon tote. In New York City, totes are 35 to 64 gallons for organics to get picked up at the curb. Mixed recycling and trash often go into a bag first. We want to make sure the bag liners and color coding is super clear to staff and to customers. So it's clear bag for recycling. It's a black bag for trash. Super, super simple stuff, but it makes all the difference in the world. You set yourself up for success. These are example front of house stations. Again, it's all about the visual cues, different shaped openings, different colors that align with the colors of the signage. These are on the left, that's at Brett's Bakery. On the right, that's at Eataly at downtown. Now at Brett's, they also have liquids disposal, so they have a little strainer drain on their site that's by all their coffee, where they have their creamers and things, so that people can dispose of liquids before they throw things away. You keep those color coding in your waste storage, and then you keep that organization when you get out to the curb. On the right here, this is so important. If all this material is commingled, so the trash and the recycling are commingled, the hauler is just going to toss it all in the trash truck. So everything needs to stay separated. It's great when you're using toters, which is very common for compost in New York City. So you see to the right the green toters. But sometimes compost is going in bags in 1-yard containers or in other things, and it's easy for the trash and compost to get mixed together. And that separation is critical, because if it doesn't stay separated at the curb, it doesn't stay separated. And then you train your team. And as I mentioned, training is so much easier when you've done everything else. And there's training, which what you're seeing up on the top left is a bigger picture. Why our company cares. This is what our program is. This is what's happening in New York City. But then we also do, there's station training happening with actual employees in a corporate dining environment on the left side and the bottom. But over to the right, you're seeing training in the kitchen, and then we often do station training. So we stand with someone and say, okay, where are your closest compost totes? So when you fill this up, where are you tipping it? Where's the closest signage? So if you have any questions, you can get re-educated, that kind of thing. It's all about making it easy. And then we track success. On the left is an example of our tracking tool, but some of our customers track their daily waste on a piece of paper on the wall. They just tick it off and eventually put it in a spreadsheet. And they just track, we have 10 bags a day. And if we weigh those bags on a regular basis, we can do averages, because the goal is to say, this is the weight of the waste you generate every month. This is how much you're diverting from landfill. This is how much is going to different kinds of beneficial use. We want to look at our waste streams that go to the hauler. We also want to combine our donations information so that we truly understand the impact that we're having on our business and on the planet. So on the right is a sample dashboard where we work with our clients to report, okay, we're down 7% from our goal, we're 8% up from last month, just to kind of keep people motivated. Because when you take all these steps and you adopt the program, you want to achieve success. So that was a lot of information. So I'm excited for any questions. Our information is here. Feel free to reach out after this webinar with questions. We're happy to take them. We are very excited about New York City and the change in regulation, but we also understand that it presents a challenge. So we're here and excited to help.
Perfect. Christina, thank you so much for your time today. A really insightful presentation. I hope that everyone learned a lot. I know I did. This was really great. Let's open up the floor to some questions, see if anybody here has any questions. Okay, first question over here we have is, what is the average cost of a program?
That's a great question. It's hard to know unless we know how much waste someone has, but basically you are being charged by the tote that you fill, whether that's a 35-gallon or a 64-gallon tote. And the pricing per tote tends to run anywhere from $13 at its lowest, depending on the hauler, for that 35-gallon, up till we've seen as much as $28 a tote for a 64-gallon tote. When we have done the math, it's very similar to the pricing for landfill, but when you get up into that $28 zone, which is the more expensive, it's higher than trash. Most of the haulers that we're working with tend to be in that 15 to 20 for both the 35 and 64-gallon totes.
Excellent. Thanks, Christina.
Sure.
That sounds good. Next question we have from Jason. It's a little bit of a longer question, so let me just read it across. Much in the way rising labor costs have placed ownership in a less profitable position, won't 0% waste raise costs so much that we begin again to see unemployment rise and wages become stagnant yet again, or worse, fall due to higher minimum wage requirements? I've seen this beginning already. What are the incentives as opposed to just penalties for non-compliance?
We love that question too, because these are questions we ask to the city all of the time. And so I don't know how many of you have read in the newspaper about franchising, which the city has pelling, which means they'll be creating districts around the city. And when franchising happens, haulers will have to contract directly with the city to get the right to pick up waste in a particular neighborhood, in a particular district. And each district will have 3 haulers. So you will have some competition still. People were concerned that, like LA, we just have 1 and that would be bad. But anyway, when franchising happens, the city intends to cap the pricing for composting so that it is cheaper than landfill and incineration is today. Currently, there is no incentive, which is why when we work with our clients on composting, we're looking at the big picture. We work on recycling because that's where they can save money. And we work on food waste reduction, which is the big win. EPA estimates that for on average, every pound of food waste, so the less expensive items all the way to the salmon, the average is about $1.17 is the value per pound. So imagine if you saved 10 pounds a day over 365 days. I mean, it adds up. And that just, the savings that you can have on food waste reduction dwarfs the cost of your hauling program. So we're constantly saying, let's look for these savings in your overall waste program, because we know right now that composting is not any cheaper than trash, and it's an extra step for you to have to separate it out.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Christina. We have one other question over here. How do I know how much organic waste my business is generating?
We'd love for you to do an audit, because that's the only way you truly know. But sometimes, we'll work with folks that are in a hurry to set up a program. We don't have time to get that audit done, or they don't have the budget to do the audit. And we have, over the number of years that we have been auditing kitchens and overall operations, come up with some kind of benchmarks where, like in fast casual, for example, we'll see anywhere from 0.5 pounds to a pound of food waste per cover, depending on how much prep is happening on site and depending on people dining, if people are dining in. So we can provide a kind of simple set of questions to answer to kind of think about where you might be on that range. Once we're in fine dining, we have seen anything from 1.5 pounds a person to 3 pounds a person, because when you're preparing, when everything is prepared from scratch, and when you have lobster, which has a lot of waste every time all these things, the pound per cover goes way up.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we have one last question. It says, some customers care about composting. Is there any sort of certificate or signage that we can post to show customers that we compost and that we're sustainable?
From the city today, no, but there certainly are certifications like Green Restaurant Certification and others that people are applying for. But we've been talking a lot about that too, how we can help our clients post. I mean, right now what you have to have is your sanitation. You need to post their sticker saying that they're collecting X streams and who the hauler is, but that's not very useful for promotion. We work with our clients a lot on their signage to help them communicate, whether they're writing things on a chalkboard or they're posting at their recycling stations, or sometimes putting something at the bottom of the menu. Our client Westbourne made this phenomenal guide to sustainability that was on paper, that was full of seeds that you could then plant and grow flowers with. But it was beautiful, and they because they have worked to be zero waste from the start, and that includes how they constructed their site, they have put a lot into education and the storytelling on what they're doing, and it's really phenomenal. But we do lots of different things with clients. We work with them on social media to share what they're doing.
Awesome, that's great. Looks like that concludes the questions that were asked during the session. Everybody that attended today's session, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it. Please don't forget to tune into next week's webinar, same time, same place. We'll be talking about safer disposable foodware options with our sustainability manager, Gilly Wolf. See you all at 10 a.m. next Tuesday, guys. Thanks so much.